I have 4 basic rules for people which they can remember as a way to help their gut microbes and as a general food rule. The first is to try and eat 30 different types of plant every week. And remember that plants are not just kale, they are nuts, seeds, herbs, spices, and things you wouldn't normally think of as plants. And some people even think of coffee as a plant. So, you could also include red wine. Now, the second rule is to have regular fermented foods as a small amount every day, not only cheese and yogurt, which everyone knows about, but fermented milk, kefir, kombuchas, fermented tea. And then, of course, you've got sauerkrauts or Korean kimchi, which are fermented vegetables. Then the third thing I tell people is to try and pick these plants that are high in polyphenols. And these are the defensive chemicals that all plants have to some extent, but they range really widely between them. So the ones with the high polyphenol counts are really good for your gut microbes, and they're the colorful ones, the ones that have strong, often slightly bitter tastes, and you find them in nuts, you find them in seeds, you find them in berries, you find them in high quality olive oil, you find them in coffee beans, you find them in green tea, and it's the plant that has the red bits, the really big colors. It's more like the purple carrots compared to the light orange ones. They're the 3 positive rules, and the 4th rule is to try and help your gut microbes out by not having too many ultra-processed foods, which comes with a whole range of chemicals, which they find hard to deal with. And also, ultra-processed generally deprives them of nutrition and fiber. And if you follow those basic rules, you can't go far wrong.
Let's go a bit deeper into some of the nuances here. Going back to the polyphenol piece. So you mentioned eating foods high in polyphenols to feed the gut microbiome. Let's take that story a little bit further. So we're eating these foods, the gut microbiome is going to get these polyphenols. What happens next?
Well, the gut microbes break down the plants that you're eating, and particularly the fibers, and this releases these polyphenols as well as other nutrients in the fiber. And it acts as like rocket fuel for the gut microbes, which allows them to reproduce and also produce their own powerful chemicals, which medicinal chemicals or nutrients, which are key for our body. So those chemicals get passed once they've got the polyphenols, they've got the fiber, they're then passed to the immune cells lining the gut and other receptors around the body and transmitted through the bloodstream, through our nervous system, all kinds of pathways we're only just beginning to discover to keep our body in its perfect metabolic state. They will send signals to the brain to stop us overeating. They will send signals to prevent depression through chemicals like serotonin. But their main influence is this interaction with our immune system, which most of it is actually in our gut, just where our microbes are. And that's not by chance. So the immune system and the gut microbes are constantly talking to each other through these little chemical signals and sort of feeding off each other. And that is really important for our body because that starts to affect our long-term health, how we react to everything from COVID to autoimmune disease, to food allergies, but also as a preventive measure against cancers, against aging. And there's increasing knowledge that this is really important. So, the more polyphenols, the more variety of these chemicals that you're feeding your microbes, the more species you can propagate and more healthy chemicals they're producing, really to keep you in balance. So that's why we think polyphenols are important. And there's a group of them that actually have been shown to reduce inflammation as well. So they reduce the stress on the body generally, and particularly our blood vessels. And that's why they used to be called, before we knew about the gut microbiome, they used to all be called antioxidants, which was a very vague general medical term about how they could mop up the sort of side effects of general metabolism, which otherwise would build up and cause stress to the body. But now we know much more about it. We know that the humans themselves, we can't process the polyphenols without the microbiome. And they do produce considerable energy for the microbes. So it's their sort of special superfood, if you like.
And I would assume the second step of building up that gut microbiome would be integral to happen before the polyphenols. Not that you're going to wait to eat polyphenols, but because the gut microbiome is going to eat the polyphenols and create all these health benefits, if we don't have a good microbiome to start with, I'm assuming we're not going to get the same results.
I think to some extent that's true, but we don't really know this interaction between the different states of the microbiome and how they can process foods. But we do know in general that if you lack certain microbes, you can't fully get all the nutrients from the plants or the foods as well. So we do know the dangers of people who go long periods of time on very unhealthy diets, low in fiber, can sort of wipe out a lot of their good microbes, and it can be hard to get them back into your gut through just introducing a few specific foods. It takes much longer, we think, to reintroduce good microbes than it does to suppress bad ones, suppress the inflammatory ones that we see with people on regular junk food diets. So this is a very new science. There's an anecdotal story is which I wrote about in the books. Is I wanted to do this study of eating 10 days at McDonald's to see what effect it would have on my gut microbes. And many people already know this story, but it turned out that the volunteer who came forward to do the study instead of me was my son, who was really keen on McDonald's and desperate for cash as well, free food for 10 days as a student. So he did this, but despite wanting to quit at 4 days, which I told him he couldn't do, because I wasn't a responsible father, he carried on for 10 days, but he lost, according to this N of 1 study, 40% of his gut diversity in that time. And in the subsequent years, I've tried to feed him up, but he's never got back to that original starting level. And so people who do have prolonged periods with no fiber at all, with very poor diets, we think may struggle a little bit to do this. But that's obviously an extreme case, and it's just an N of 1. And I think we can change most people's gut microbes for the better. And we know the story from there's a similar story about the ability to digest seaweed. So naturally, people in the US and Canada, the UK are not don't have those microbes that can break down seaweed and get the nutrients from them. But if they live sometime in Japan or maybe in Vancouver with lots of sushi restaurants or San Francisco, they would pick up the microbes from the food, and eventually they would then have the capacity to break down seaweed. So I think you can train your gut to do this, but it does take a bit longer than people think. It's not a sort of immediate that any microbe, can suddenly retrain itself to eat a different product.
You talked about there picking up different microbes from different foods. Is that where the first step you talked about, eating a diversity of foods, is that how that fits in? So you're eating different foods and they're going to have different populations of microbiomes on them that are going to repopulate the gut?
Not really. I think it's more, yes, there's something about eating these foods that have microbes, but most of those microbes on the plant, say if you don't fully wash it or just in the soil, aren't ones that generally live within your gut. And so you have to try and cultivate them. You hope that there's a few seeds lying around somewhere in your gut, just dormant, because they go dormant with these spores for a long time. And so what you hope is that if you eat this diversity of plants, each plant has hundreds of different chemicals in it. And it may be that this microbe only likes 4 or 5 of those chemicals, but it can be just to be titillated by these chemicals as they sense them, and it'll come out of its dormant state and start reproducing and get a niche that builds it up to its sort of full capacity. And I think that's really what we're hoping for, that because humans never run out of microbes, whatever you do to them, and we know this from people that have barium enemas or they go through these cleansing processes. You can never get rid of your micro species, and they don't tend to change that much. So we think really they're just going down to very small levels, and it's how you sort of coax them back up again so that they can actually be visible, we think is what's happening. But, again, some of this is guesswork because it is so new. So I want to stress that it hasn't all been studied, infinite detail. We're just trying to work all this through. But certainly it's the idea of good bugs versus bad bugs is something that we're coming to, as well as this concept of diversity, and both the number of species you've got and the ratio of the good guys to the bad guys, I think is becoming the way we're looking at gut health in general. But the 30 plants a week gives you sufficient variety of chemicals to keep all your microbes happy and reproducing and producing their good stuff for you. I think that's the basic principle. Whereas if you're only eating if potato chips, you're only a vegetable, then you've only got a few microbes that can really survive off that. The others are living off fat and a bit of the meat, and so the rest are struggling to survive.
If you enjoyed that clip, press here for the full episode. I'll see you over there.
So it does mean a little bit of education about our bodies and, this new organ that's suddenly come into our lives, which we didn't know 10 years ago really was there, that all of us have.